So much for coming out to Wine 101. My name is Alana. I'm a director here at the Wine School. I absolutely love to teach 101 classes. So if you're a beginner, you are in the right place. Even if you have some background on wine, even, maybe a little bit idea of what these words are behind me, the idea for these classes is to just feel relaxed and comfortable and learn some key terms so that you can describe what you like to somebody in a restaurant or at a winery, what have you. So it is meant to be a very casual, laid-back atmosphere. And I have given you those cover sheets so that you can write down questions, because sometimes we freeze a little bit. We don't want to raise our hand. So if you have a burning wine question, you can put it down on that cover sheet, and I'll come around in just a moment and collect them. So here we are. You see in front of you your Wine 101 tasting sheet. So these are the wines that we're going to taste today. Now, you may have noticed you don't have anything in front of you to rinse, and that is for a reason. That's because we're going to start with our white wines and move to red wines, and we're also going from light to full. So we call this a progressive tasting. This is how we often taste with winemakers or in a trade setting. So this is actually how you do it. You start light and then move full. Now, if we wanted to reverse course, then we would absolutely want to rinse our glass, but as it is, we don't have to. So you have little cups at your stations. Feel free after you sample a wine. If it's not to your liking, that's perfectly fine. This class is really for you to get a sense of what the major wine styles are in the world. So if you take a look at your sheet, the 7 wines that we're going to have, we're going to start with 2 white wines and then 5 red wines, okay? And the wines are going to come from all different regions around the world, and they're also going to be different styles. So some are going to be tart, some are going to be jammy and fruity, some of them are going to be kind of bitter or astringent. So you will find yourself gravitating in each of these flights to one wine or the other. And that's why we use flights in a wine class. We like to have 2 wines side by side to compare them. So for flights 1, 2, and 3, we're going to be talking about these wines side by side. The last wine, flight 4, I will tell you why we are doing that on its own once we get there. So that is the basic outline of how we're going to conduct tonight's class. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay, all right. Anybody been drinking anything before class? It's fine if you have. It's totally fine. I am not adverse, obviously. All right, guys, let's get started. So I am going to mute myself. I am going to come around and pour everybody those first 2 wines. And then once everybody has the wines, I'll come back to the front and we'll taste them together. Here we go. So we have 2 very different white wines in front of us. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about white wine is that people don't like it. And very often it's actually the case, especially here in the US, we grow up and kind of the first wines that we enjoy tend to be big Italian reds or big California reds. And when you start that way, it's a little bit hard to roll back and appreciate really kind of the delicate nuances of a lighter wine. So we're going to start with, as I said, 2 very different white wines, and you're going to find that you have a clear preference for one or the other. The only time I have experienced somebody who really didn't care, they were somebody who had, been drinking Mad Dog for 30 years. They weren't tasting anything. So I promise you, you're going to have a proclivity to one or the other, and that's going to be really helpful because just from this first flight, you'll have some really good key terms to know how to describe your palate and what you like in a wine. So before we get started into the nitty gritty too much, I want to walk through how you want to taste wine. So when you're in a setting like this, or you're in a restaurant and somebody pours you a wine, how do you want to evaluate it? What is that all about? Really, there is a ceremony to it, and it's about focusing our senses and really centering ourselves and giving our attention to wine, because good wine should be something that speaks of a place and is really a product of tender loving care by the winemaker. There are things out there we call Franken wines. They are just monsters. They're basically grape juice with dyes and oak chips and sugar, and And that's not wine. Wine is definitely something that is a reflection of nature. And so we want to use all of our senses to really get inside that wine. And even if ultimately, once we taste it, it's not our favorite, that's okay. As long as you have sat with it and thought about it, that's all that matters. So let's take wine number one, the Sauvignon Blanc. We could do either, but let's take wine number one. And the number one thing that I want you to learn from Wine 101, truly, is to always use stemmed glassware. That's it. Stems are key. Does anybody want to take a guess why?
Because your hands
Very good. Your hands warm up the wine, right? This looks great. It's bad form, all right? It's really bad form. I can't tell you when I see, if I'm at a tasting or something and I see people cupping their wine, I just really, want to go over and correct them because temperature dramatically changes how you experience the wine. So in the US, we tend to drink our white wines too cold. Why is that? Because you can't taste them that way. People think they don't like white wines. Well, let me make them freezing cold and I really can't taste them. So that's a no-no. And red wines as well, we tend to serve too warm. We tend to serve them at what? What's the common knowledge about red wines? Very good. Room temperature. What's room temperature? 70. It's 71 in here, right? 65. 65 is the most that you want your red wines to be served at. So keep in mind, temperature is really critical. So using the glass or using the stemmed glassware is all you need. I don't care if you get your glasses from IKEA. We have things from IKEA here. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be expensive. Just make sure you have the stem. Okay. So once you have the stem, the next fun thing we get to do is what? Swirl. And why are we swirling? What is the deal? Very good. You're opening it up, right? So wine is something that has to be volatile. It has to be in the air for us to experience it. So all of those aromas, they don't reach our brain unless we swirl. So whether it is a sparkling wine or a still wine or a dessert wine, you always want to swirl. And after you swirl, you're going to stick your nose in it, right? So get your nose as far in there as you feel comfortable. And I like to take 2 or 3 nice deep breaths. The vast majority, about 80% of what we're going to experience on the palate forms in our olfactory system first. So this is by far the most important step, I promise you. So does this remind you of anything? The smell? Grapefruit, very nice. I would have been happy if you just said wine. That would be great. It's wine. This is 101. Perfect. Wonderful. Grapefruit, very well done. So white wines, you can smell things like citrus fruit, that's common. Also orchard fruit, things like apples or pears are common. And then other things you might see like tropical fruit. Those are our major fruits. And a way to start really getting good at identifying aromas is an acronym, FEW. And F stands for fruit, E stands for earth, and W stands for wood, and by wood we mean oak, okay? All good wine is a combination of fruit and earth. There's no fine wine that's all fruity. That's white Zinfandel, we're over that. There's no good wine that's all earthy. That wouldn't be very enjoyable at all. Is everything okay, Keith?
Everything's great. Yeah, no, I just want to make sure that I was recording, it's really good. And I just want to make sure that there's no one working out,
So when you're trying to describe, we always start with fruit. That's the most accessible. That's kind of the easiest. Then we think about, is there anything in the earth category? And this is where it gets a little bit tough. You might see YouTube videos, people licking rocks, What? No, you don't need to do that. That's a bad idea. So what we mean by earth, though, it can be a number of things. It can be soil, it can be potting soil. It can be something we call forest floor, which are like moss and leaves and bark, but it can also be flowers or spices. It can even be something we call minerality, and that's the smell of, sometimes people describe it as, you know, the smell of pavement after a rain. The fancy word for that is petrichor, or wet rocks, or ozone, or salty ocean air. Something in that category also qualifies for earth, okay? So the earthiness in a Sauvignon Blanc, there's some minerality. Now there's also something else that's not fruit and not mineral. Does anybody smell something a little bit unusual in there? Now this Sauvignon Blanc is from New Zealand. And New Zealand has a cooler climate. It's a maritime climate. And there's a certain component that you will notice more in a cooler climate that makes Sauvignon Blanc than, say, a California Sauvignon Blanc. The smell of green pepper. Go back in your glass. If you were thinking it, you should have said it. You don't get any bonus points now. No more free pours. But there's something that smells grassy or like jalapeno or green pepper. Isn't that strange once you smell it, right? But Sauvignon Blanc, wherever you find it in the world, is going to have that to some degree, okay? So let's see if we actually taste it, if we actually taste green pepper and minerality and jalapeno pepper. So now I'd like you to take a small sip. Let it rest on your tongue and just go ahead and move that all around your palate. And then when you're ready, take a sip and swallow. All right, I'm watching your faces. I see your face. What are you doing? What's happening?
It's like a little, like I can taste like a little pungency.
Absolutely. It's tart. It's super tart, right? Okay. So the citrus, very good. Yeah, you taste that almost underripe grapefruit. It's really, really pungent or tart. That's Sauvignon Blanc. It has high acidity, okay? Acidity. That's what this first flight is about, acidity. So Sauvignon Blanc has high acidity. No matter where it's made, it's going to have high acidity. What makes Sauvignon Blanc wonderful is that high acidity makes it a wonderful pairing for food. When you have high acid like that, this is something that can pair with vegetables, it can pair with fish dishes, it can pair with even some spicy foods, because it really has that nice acidity that acts sort of like a lemon wedge that you can just brighten up any dish with. So acidity is key for food pairing, but for some people it can be a little bit intense on the palate, okay? So that is our standard Sauvignon Blanc. I'm sure everybody has had a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc in the past. This is something, it's also great for parties, just general crowd pleaser, light, refreshing, all of those things. Now let's move to the opposite of Sauvignon Blanc, and we're going to try a Chardonnay. And this Chardonnay is from Chile, specifically the Casablanca Valley, which is a cooler area for Chile. They do Pinot Noir, they do Chardonnay, they do some Sauvignon Blanc as well. This is a 2016, so we have a little bit of age on it. Notice, if you will, the change in the color. If you take a moment and hold the glass on an angle, you'll notice that the color is different, right? How would you describe this color? It's more yellow, right? It's more golden than wine number one, which was very, very light. Okay, so let's give this a swirl. Stick our nose in there. Now, just from this moment, you know you're smelling a very different wine, right? These two wines are very dissimilar. Where'd the grapefruit go? Gone. Where'd the jalapeno pepper go? Gone. Does this remind anybody of anything?
Butter.
Butter, well done, on the nose, butter, specifically diacetyl, you know, sort of that almost movie popcorn butter, like really, really buttery butter. You're absolutely right. The fruits here are more like pear or apple. They're really ripe. So you would expect that from a place like Chile. So our butteriness is our earthy component, and then our fruit is going to be apple and pear. All right, let's take a sip. Okay. Now this wine, we have a little bit of oak. Okay, there's a little bit of oak here. We had no oak in wine number 1. That's typical for Sauvignon Blanc. Chardonnay doesn't have to have oak, but oftentimes it does, okay? So if you taste a little bit of that vanilla or baking spice, some people, Keith likes to say pumpkin spice latte, something in that warm baking spice family, that's the oak, okay? So how did this make your mouth feel compared to wine number 1?
Less tired.
No, yeah, it's not, you're not getting that pucker face. No, it's creamy, it's smooth. It's like a ripe apple pie on the palate. It's really, really different. So here, our acidity is much lower. Okay, so when we're pairing something like this with food, we need to think differently. We need to think about the texture and the weightiness of the dish and match it. So if in flight number 1, the Sauvignon Blanc, I would pair that very easily with a ceviche. For this Chardonnay, I'm going to think more about scallops with burnt butter or lobster tail, something along those lines, something that's heavier and denser. Okay, so whether you like number 2 or not, there's still a place for it in a meal. If it pairs well, that's going to be the way to go. Now, how many people prefer wine number 1 tonight? Excellent. Folks online, feel free to enter your, because it was overwhelmingly number 1 here. Overwhelmingly. I'm not surprised. That's the trend, okay? Chardonnay has become somewhat ubiquitous, that especially that buttery and oaky quality, not everybody loves these days. That was very popular in the 80s and 90s. People have moved away from that. So if you prefer the Sauvignon Blanc, I beg of you, please try a dry Riesling, particularly from the Finger Lakes of New York. Those are excellent. One of my other very favorite, yes?
I was gonna say, could it be that we're not eating with it? Like we're just drinking alone, a citrus thing might be more palatable.
Absolutely. So the question, that's a great question. So the observation really was, well, if we had food, would those numbers change? Would those responses change? Absolutely. Absolutely. We do something called the Sommelier Smackdown, and we do wine pairings with that. And the idea is not which do you prefer, but which is the better pairing. And that's a whole different question. You're absolutely right. So food changes things. And yes, the tartness on its own may not be pleasant, especially right now, later in the day. Yeah.
Question, you mentioned Riesling. Isn't all Riesling real sweet or? No, I don't like sweet. And when you said about Riesling.
I know. If we had more time, I love to show everybody a dry Riesling. Yeah. Dry Rieslings are beautiful, especially in the Finger Lakes. They're doing beautiful dry Rieslings. My bottom line tip, if you want to experience a dry Riesling, check the alcohol content on the label. Make sure it's 12.5%. It'll be completely dry. I swear. And they are beautiful. Riesling is actually the sommelier's best friend. It pairs with more foods than anything else. So dry Riesling is absolutely wonderful. So thank you for your question. That's I'm so glad you asked. Yes, I think if you like the Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling is beautiful. The other wine you have to try, so Spain is my favorite place for wines. I'm always going to encourage people to try Albarino. Has anybody had Albarino before? Albarino. Yes, yes. So they have it in Portugal. They have it in Spain. It is zesty. It's lively. You'll never have to drink Pinot Grigio again. Pinot Grigio is the white wine for people who don't like white wine. When people say, oh, I like Pinot Grigio, it's like, no, you don't like white wine. It's okay. It's okay. So there you go. So these two wines, the acidity is apparent in wine number 1. Less acidity, more creaminess is wine number 2, the Chardonnay. So if you like the Chardonnay, what else might you like? There's a wonderful Italian wine called Verdicchio. Verdicchio, Verdicchio. It's grown mainly along the Adriatic coast. It's absolutely delicious with food, but it doesn't have that piercing acidity. The other grape you might like is Viognier. And Viognier is a grape we see, Virginia has taken Viognier as its signature grape, and it's becoming more and more popular in California as well. Viognier. Viognier.
Viognier. I thought it was Viognier. Some people call that.
However you want to say it. You want to say Viognier. You give it an Italian swirl, whatever you want. It's fine. All right. Wonderful, wonderful. Questions? Okay, does everybody feel comfortable with that first flight? Yes.
I have a question. I
Yes.
don't know if you can say this. Do you have a winery in the Finger Lakes that you'd recommend?
I do indeed have a winery in the Finger Lakes that I would recommend. Absolutely. There are many, many good ones. I am thinking Ravine is probably my favorite. Ravines is fantastic. If you can't find Ravine, Red Newt is great. Those are my two favorites. Okay, all right. Wonderful. Well done. I like to spend a lot of time talking about white wine because when we get into red wine, it gets a whole more complicated. Okay, so remember, don't forget what we talked about in this flight. We're going to move into our first set of red wines. These are our light red wines, and we'll compare those. I do apologize for the fruit flies. We are in week 2 of our winemaking class. If you head downstairs, you will see our actual wines in progress. They're doing Carmenere this year from the Columbia Valley out in Washington. 2 weeks ago, this room looked like Dexter's kill room with, sheeting. I'm still finding grape seeds in random places. So that's what's going on. I do apologize. In a week or so, it should be gone. All right. So I am going to mute myself once again and then come around and pour everybody. Once everybody has their wines, I'll come back to the front.
What temperature should you be serving white wine at?
Thank you for 55.
55. Yeah.
Folks online, the question was, what temperature do you serve white wine at? And the answer is 55. Okay. All right, folks, so here we are, our first set of red wines in front of us. I can already feel the excitement. You came to wine class to drink red wine. I totally understand. So we are going to compare these two wines. Now, just a little bit about label reading. When we're here in the US, it's very easy to tell what grape is in the bottle, right? It's gonna be on the label, okay? Very, very easy. In Europe, it's different. In Europe, the place is more important than the grape. And so what you'll see on the label is the place and typically not the grape name, okay? So this is why people come to me, level 3, intermediate, and I make you memorize. And that's when wine becomes no fun. Because you have to memorize what grapes are in all of these different regions throughout Europe, and it's not going to be on the label. Excuse me. And Chianti is one of these wines that people are familiar with, but oftentimes don't know that Chianti is actually a place. Okay, it's not the grape. The grape is Sangiovese. Sangiovese is the king of grapes. It comes in very different styles, many different names throughout Italy. Chianti is the place, okay? Has anybody been to Tuscany? Yes. What did they tell you about Chianti? Do you recall? No?
They didn't tell me anything.
They didn't tell you anything. Fair enough. Oftentimes, folks who have gone to Tuscany, they'll come back, and the thing they will have learned, and everybody feels very good, that they went all the way to Tuscany to learn to look for the black rooster. that sticker that is on most Chianti bottles. The problem is it doesn't mean anything. It's a trade organization. That's it. So when they tell you look for that, they're promoting their organization, which is fine. But when you're actually trying to find a good bottle of Chianti, the thing that you want to do is look for the white label on the neck of the bottle. And the initials will say DOC or DOCG. That means this is the special area and this wine is going to taste how it's supposed to taste. So here's the upside of European wines. They don't tell you what's on the label, but once you find a place that you really enjoy, you don't have to worry about producer or vintage. You really can just say, oh, I really like Chinon. I am going to get Chinon, and it doesn't matter who made it. Oh, I really like Beaujolais. You know you're going to get a consistent Beaujolais if it comes from that specific place. It's the same idea as you get the, Parmesan has to come from Parma, or Champagne has to be made in Champagne. It's the same idea. So that's what you want to look for. Don't worry about any roosters or decals whatsoever. It's the DOC or DOCG for Italy. For France, it's AOC or AOP. Same thing. Okay, so let's go. Wine number 1 is our Pinot Noir. And we're going to have Pinot from one of my very favorite places, the Willamette Valley out in Oregon. If you like Pinot, this is a fabulous place for Pinot Noir. They are very much interested in replicating the Burgundian style, meaning they really focus on the earthiness of Pinot. A lot of California Pinots focus on fruit. Willamette Valley tries to bring in that signature earthiness. So give this a nice swirl and sniff. Oh, I love the smell of this. It's so pretty. Does anybody want to tell me what fruit you might be smelling?
Cherry.
Very good. Very good. Cherry. Perfect. You said it in unison. I love it. On the nose, cherry. Pinot Noir typically has a cherry. Now, it can be a dark cherry. It can be a nice bright red cherry, but something in the cherry family. Perfect. Absolutely right. Now, what about the earthiness? Does anybody smell something a little funky in there? You're thinking. Does anybody smell something like mushrooms or leather or like a saddle, something that is earthy, even a little funky?
I was gonna say dirty socks.
Thank you. I wish you would have said dirty socks. That would have been accurate. There is something funky. You are not wrong. You are not wrong. Sometimes people say blue cheese. There's something funky in there. You're absolutely right. Pinot Noir is always a mix of fruit and funk. That's just the way they make it. And I know somebody watched the movie Sideways last evening. In Sideways, it's this big celebration of Pinot Noir. And when that movie came out, everybody thought they had to love Pinot Noir. But here's the deal. Sometimes Pinot Noir can smell really freaky. That's a lot. My mother, she does not enjoy Pinot Noir, and a lot of people don't. So I would never put out, for people who don't already know they like Pinot Noir, I wouldn't put it out in a party because it's expensive and not everybody is going to enjoy it. Now let's taste it and see if we smell any of that funkiness. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
All right. Cherries, right? Maybe some dark raspberries, some oak. Now I'm getting the nutmeg, the cinnamon, some vanilla of the oak, but no sweat socks, no fungi, It's really pleasant on the palate, but that nose can be intense, okay? So we're going to compare this with wine number 2, which is our Chianti or Sangiovese. So let's go ahead, give this a swirl. And sniff. All right, now this one, is this more earthy or fruity? You know the answer. Earthy. It smells like tobacco and leather and dried herbs and a little bit of campfire and tomato stock. Yum. Let's go ahead and take a sip. Okay. This feels different, right? If you go back to the Pinot Noir, try that, and then go back to the Chianti, see if you can isolate what's different. It's not overwhelming, but it is different in the way it feels on your palate. It feels lighter, yes, that's true. They're both high in acid, so they're both about equal in acidity. Dry. You got it. The difference is wine number 2, the Chianti, is slightly drier than wine number 1. Now, dry is a term that we are going to leave behind. We don't ever have to describe a wine as dry ever again. What we're going to say, to be real wine speak, is tannic. Dryness describes how your mouth feels. And your mouth feels dry because of tannins. Okay. So tannins come from the skins, the seeds, and the stems, and to some degree, oak. And what they do is they give the wine a bitterness and an astringency. And not
Last thing you said, bitterness and
astringency.
astringency. Okay.
And not everybody enjoys that. We have different levels of sensitivity to tannins depending on our background. If you're somebody who grew up, eating your green vegetables and you've never put cream or sugar in your coffee and you always like dark chocolate, then you're probably going to really enjoy tannins. Me, on the other hand, I grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Give me all the milk chocolate, put the cream and the sugar in my coffee. I am not just naturally drawn to that sensation. So if you're somebody who likes that dryness, you like those tannins, you like the way that feels, make sure if you're doing a dinner, you give people meat and cheese, and that will smooth it out. Not everybody will enjoy tannic wines on their own, but there's nobody with a soul who's not going to enjoy wines with meat and cheese. I mean it. Yes, I said that. If you have a soul, you will enjoy this. That is just the truth. So that's how you overcome some of these. You can balance it out with food. So if you get that astringency, it's too dry, it's too bitter, have it with food. It'll mellow out. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. How many people prefer wine number 1, the Pinot Noir? Interesting. Wine number 2. Okay. So Pinot is actually one of my very favorites. If you like Pinot, you are definitely going to like Old Vine American Zinfandel. If you've ever had, not white Zinfandel, real Zinfandel is phenomenal. Spanish Garnacha is one of my very favorites. For those of you who like that bitterness, definitely I want you to try a Nebbiolo. That's the other great Italian grape. That's what goes into Barolos and Barbarescos. I also want you to try something called Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is a wonderful food pairing wine that we don't drink enough of. It's one of those unsung heroes in the wine world, Cabernet Franc. It goes very, very well with food. Fabulous. All right. All right, my friends, moving right along. This is going to be our last comparison flight. So I'm going to mute myself once again. All right, everybody, we're back. So we have, take a look at your tasting sheet. Wine number 1 is a French wine. This is from an area called Côte Catalan. It's actually on the border with Spain, so it's close to the Pyrenees. And Grenache is the grape. Old vine Grenache is the specific type of wine. And I point that out because old vine is a really good label term. If you see that, it doesn't have a specific definition. It could mean 80 years in some instances. It could mean 60 in another. But old vines give the best fruit. Okay, so young vines, you're going to get more quantity, but as vines get older, they give out berries, not as many, but much better. So when I see that word old vine on a label, all things being equal, that's the bottle I'm going to go for. So old vine Grenache, just to point that out. And then wine number 2, this is the Everyday Syrah in Santa Ynez Valley, which is the area around Santa Barbara. So go ahead and pick up wine number 1. That's going to be your Grenache. And I would like you to give it a swirl. And when you see legs, let me know. So everybody seeing those tears stream down? Did everybody see it? Yeah.
Did we not see them on the other ones?
Well, it's more visible on this one. So we're doing it with this because it's more visible. Yep, the Grenache is you're gonna see it more with the Grenache. Okay.
And that's because
Why? Yes. Why are we looking?
it's old vine?
So people tell you to look for the legs, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Alcohol.
Yes. Somebody said it. Alcohol. 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 They want to get lit. That's how you tell. That's it. That's all it is. You want legs, you're looking for alcohol, okay? So let's talk a little bit about how we make wine. Now, I hope this isn't too complicated. I hope this isn't too over your heads, okay? I know, guys, I'm joking. I mean, really. Grapes. We start with grapes to make wine, right? When we're in warm areas like California or the south of France or Italy or Spain, our grapes are gonna get really ripe, okay? So they're gonna have a lot of sugars, natural sugars. Sugars combined with yeast are what gives us alcohol, okay? So when we're in warm areas, the grapes are going to be filled with sugar, they undergo fermentation, and what we end up with are full-bodied wines. So that term full-bodied is directly related to the alcohol content. That's all that is. So generally speaking, about 14.5 to 15% alcohol content is full-bodied. Now, it's really important that you check your wine labels before you do a pairing for dinner. We have holidays coming up, right? I want you to check your labels before you serve wine because I am seeing California wines coming in at 16.5, 16.7%.
Wow.
You're gonna fall out of your chair. I mean, that's too much. That's just too much booze for a meal. So if you're in a warm climate, you're gonna get those really full-bodied wines. The Finger Lakes, on the other hand, is a cool climate. You're going to keep that nice acidity. So it's going to be lighter in body and higher in acidity, okay? So that's basically how that works. Now, let's talk about this Grenache. When we give it a swirl and a sniff, oh, what do we smell? What fruits are you smelling? Has anybody been to IHOP not that long ago? Boysenberry syrup, yes, right? Blueberry compote, oh. Blackberries, raspberries, really, really plump and juicy, right? There's something else we smell in this wine, the earthiness. There's a lot of dried herbs. So if you smell sage or rosemary or thyme, it's really, really pretty. So it's dark fruit and really pretty herbs. Let's take a sip. Yummy, right?
Yeah.
Now notice acidity is down, right? So if you went back to the Pinot or the Chianti, you would notice right away that those are much more tart, okay? And they actually wouldn't taste very good right now. If we went back to them, it wouldn't taste good. But this has a lower acidity, fuller body. It really coats your palate. You feel that little bead of alcohol go down. Yum, delightful, right? So Grenache or Garnacha in Spain is one of my very, very favorite wines. It is a crowd pleaser. It is just absolutely delicious. Wine number 2, let's compare that. So this is the Syrah. In Australia, they call it Shiraz. It's the exact same thing. Now, when we give this a swirl and sniff, are there any vegetarians in the room? No? Good. I only say that. I am only saying that simply because Shiraz has a meaty aroma. And I actually was a pescatarian when I first got into wine. And Shiraz was the hardest wine for me to enjoy because if you really get your nose in there, think about it. You're smelling beef jerky and charcoal and campfire, which makes it an amazing steakhouse wine. This is absolutely beautiful. Anything coming off the grill, there's pepper, white pepper, black pepper. It's absolutely delightful, but if you're not into meat, it's going to be intense. All right, let's take a sip. Now, this is a very good bottle of wine. Andrew Murray is a very good winemaker, but you notice there's a little more tannins. It's a little more dry than the Grenache, right? So again, the Grenache is going to be smoother, just like the Pinot. And the Syrah is going to have a little more grippiness, just like the Chianti. Okay? I know we had some great questions. Oh, I do not want to miss the number one question. Forgive me if you've heard this before. We did talk about with Australia and New Zealand last week. Can anybody tell me which wines have the screw caps? The cheap wine? Really? No, absolutely not. You cannot tell. You cannot tell. Screw caps are fantastic for wines. They really, really are. And most Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand wines are going to have screw cap. Why? Because corks can actually ruin your wine. They can. So 2 to 3% of wine bottles that have a cork will actually be ruined. And we've all had corked wine and didn't know it. It happens all the time. So folks who have transitioned to the screw cap, they're simply making sure that their wine never has that problem. So it is not a bad thing, but Americans hate this with a passion. We are willing to spend $1 more on a bottle to give us a fake plastic Band-Aid smelling, disgusting fake cork because we just cannot abide this. And it's absolutely silly. I love screw cap wines. There's nothing wrong with them. Just remember the cheapest wine always has a cork, right? It might be plastic, but they're always going to give you a cork so that you feel, you know, less shame, but whatever. No shame with screw caps. So do I decant every wine? This is a great question. What is decanting about? Decanting is simply aerating your wine on a bigger scale. So you never need to buy those aerators. People think, oh, I'm going to go out and spend all this money on accoutrement. And you don't need to. You don't need an aerator. You just need a wrist for your wine glass. If you want to aerate the whole bottle, it's very easy to do. I'll show you. We have my favorite, a beaker. That's it. That's it. Is this, you know, fancy? Hell no, it's not crystal. It's not faceted. It's also easy to clean. How many of us, you get your, you know, wrist stuck in that? This is so much better. All that matters is the surface area. And all that matters is you put the wine, you decant it, you let it sit for as long as it needs to taste good to you. Now, one caveat, it's only for red wines or aged wines, okay? So our first two white wines don't need to be decanted. Our Pinot Noir doesn't need to be decanted. Why? Low tannins don't need to be decanted. That dryness, that bitterness, that will benefit. That's what we're really looking for when we're decanting, is to soften the bitterness. So if you taste a wine and it's way too bitter, it's way too astringent, just decant it, sit it out 20 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. When it tastes good to you, you're done. And that's all there is to it. All right. Well done, everybody. How many people prefer wine number one in this round? Oh, how many people like number two? Interesting. All right. Earthy, spicy. So I can't believe it. We are at our last wine. Yes. Yes.
I was going to ask about the different types of grapes being grown in other parts of the world. Like, would you have a more full-bodied, I don't know, Sauvignon Blanc from one place than?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So the climate. So, you know, people in wine talk about terroir, and that can get a whole lot of mumbo jumbo. Usually when people say terroir, they don't know what they're talking about. But climate absolutely impacts your grapes. So if you have a Pinot Noir, for example, from Oregon, where it's rainy and much cooler than in California, it's going to be lower alcohol, less full-bodied. So the body is a direct relationship between the climate. So if it's a warm climate, you're going to get full-bodied. If it's a cool climate, you'll get much leaner and lighter. So that's another great metric to use. If you like that full-bodied, you know, really, really unctuous, powerful feeling, look for warm climates. If you're somebody who likes the lighter style with more acid, look for the cooler climates. I'm definitely a cooler climate person. So just knowing that is really helpful. That's a great question. Yes.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Because I've been to Northern California.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I like red Zins.
Yes.
And I remember having wines that were rock pile.
Yeah. Oh. It's a great vineyard. Yeah.
Right. Well, right. Like Sagacio rock pile.
Mm-hmm.
Rock pile. So
Yeah.
does that mean about the earth when it says rock pile? Because I hear the word rock.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So the question is specifically in Northern California, you'll sometimes see on Zin bottles, rock pile.
Yeah.
That's a special vineyard that, yes, it's referring to the rock, like that it is a rocky vineyard, but it's a very special vineyard for Zinfandel.
And is it does it mean, you know, focus on the FEW, the earth?
Not necessarily. So the question, I guess, is if it's talking about the earthiness on the label, will that give you some clue? No, unfortunately.
So they're very jammy wines. I
Yes, absolutely. They're very fruity. They're very jammy. Yes, you're absolutely right. So how do you tell, somebody had a great question. How do you tell a $50 wine from a $10 wine? How do you tell, you know, easy. If you have $50 and you can't find a good bottle of wine, there's something wrong with you. That is a ton of money. $10, I promise you, I can get you a $10 bottle of wine that will taste as good as $50, but it's much harder to find, okay? So I'm gonna give you some clues. These are some tips when you go into the wine shop, okay? I know, everybody, turn over a new page. Here we go. Here we go. So here is the deal. I want you to focus on $15 to $25. That's the sweet range. Can I go into a wine shop and find an $11 wine that's great? Yes, but when you're starting out, 15 to 25 is a sweet spot. I don't want you to buy Napa or even Sonoma. I want you to buy a place that's close to those places, but maybe you've never heard of. Like on your tasting sheet, Santa Ynez. Another place that has great wines in California, Paso Robles. So the marquee names like Napa and Sonoma or Burgundy and Bordeaux are always going to be very expensive because of their marquee value and the overhead, the marketing, the land. Napa is crazy expensive and it has been since the 1960s. So you're paying for that on the label. So don't go for the big guns. Go for the places that are close, but not as well known. So 15, 25. Next thing I want you to do is look for ratings, okay? But not ratings from, you know, the guy who manages the back of the store Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Who cares, right? You want to look for ratings from 3 places: Wine Advocate, Wine Spectator, or Wine Enthusiast. WA, WS, or WE. Those are the 3 biggies. And I want you to look for an 87 or above. There are people who only buy 89-point wines. Why? Because they think they're the best value. Because nobody can tell a difference, really, between an 89 and a 90-point wine. But as soon as you hit 90, you're going to be able to raise your price. So 15 to 25, off the beaten path, 87 and above. That's your gold star way of buying wine. And despite me telling you this, you know what you're going to do? You're going to walk into a wine shop and you're going to say, which label do I like the best? And you're going to buy that one. And it's fine because we all do it. It's totally fine. And people know that. And that's fine. But the thing, how do you really become a good shopper? In the wine world today, we have a lot of variety. We have a lot of inventory. Spain, Chile, Argentina, these places make unbelievably good wine for a fraction of the cost of California wines. Absolutely, bar none.
Even with the shipping too?
Yeah, even with the tariffs that have been added, just look for those off the beaten track places.
You said Spain, Chile, and
Spain, Chile, Argentina are my favorites for value. Australia also has a lot of great values. You guys love this Syrah. Definitely check out Australia for Shiraz. It's a very, very similar style. So that's what you want to look for. But Washington State for Cabernets right now, oh my gosh, if I'm going to buy a Cabernet, I can buy one for $20 that will drink like a $100 bottle. Easy. So,
What's the name of that?
well, just Washington State, just a Washington State Cabernet that falls within those parameters, you're going to do great. So that's kind of the bare bones way of going about it. But just don't get caught up in labels and brand names and things that are easy to understand. I was in a wine shop not that long ago, and the mom said to her kid, go find the highest rated wine and bring it to mommy. And I'm like, wow, you're really teaching some values there. I mean, wow, that's wild. But people get caught up in this ratings thing, and they're useful, but you can find really good deals in that 80 point range. All right, my friends, last wine, here we are. Can't believe it. I'm good. All right, my friends, I've poured you all of the last wine. Every last drop is in your glass. Why is that? So we are at flight number 4. We have one single wine in front of us. It is Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet is king. It's king. That's it. Full stop. All right. I'm going to try and do the, ooh, I got a little sip. All right. Let's do this together. We know the deal now. Give it a swirl. Swirl, swirl. It's a little bit harder because you have fuller pores. All right. Get your nose in there. Oh, yum, yum, yum. Right? Dark currant. Some plum, ripe plum. Cedar. Spice. A little bit of green pepper. So, so pretty. Some forest floor, some campfire.
So why do we like it so much?
Let's take a sip.
And I'm hungry. Yeah, baby.
Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, it's so good, right? Why do we like it so much? Why is it so good?
That's what I said.
That is a great question. We're going to answer it.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Oops.
Everything.
Yes.
Everybody likes it.
Yes. It's not too tart. It's not too jammy. It's not too bitter. It's just right. It's the crowd favorite. This is the go-to because it's so inherently balanced. It's so pleasing. It speaks to us truly. If you don't like this, find another hobby and just leave it to us. Let us finish it. Truly, there's something else out there for you. Give it to us. Especially South Africa. Oh, South Africa is coming into its own. They are all about sustainability. Every wine bottle from South Africa has this sustainability seal. They are all about promoting women winemakers and minority winemakers, and they are doing absolutely gorgeous wines. It is one of my very, very favorite places. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Okay.
No.
I put my little stars.
Yes.
That is amazing.
Yes.
So my final question is,
Yes.
I was saying to my friend, I love sushi, and they say you're supposed to have, with fish, you're supposed to have white river. Can I just, I'm not being a wise guy, like, can this just pair with everything, or should you not?
I like you so much.
And I just said, no, I want to
I like you so much.
Buy things with
And yet, your questions just pierce my heart. So the question is, can you drink this with sushi? You can do whatever you want. But I am going to have to ask that I never, ever see you doing it. I have to say, I got to put the brakes. Red wine and sushi, I am sorry to say, I cannot bless that union. I cannot. In all seriousness, there is a chemical reaction that can happen with raw fish and the tannins in red wine. I believe you'll never do it again. But here's the thing.
I'm a little scared right now.
All good fun. But here's the thing. It is so funny because it's true. I can't count the number of articles I've read from people who have huge wine cellars, who have tasted more wines and better wines than I will ever have in my entire life. And they say their favorite thing to have it with is sushi. And my mind just goes berserko. But it is one of those things. You are not the only one who enjoys that. Fair warning though, there will be a day. There will be where your luck runs out and you are going to have a reaction that is just mouth-numbingly bad. So I'm just telling you that is one of those things. Sushi, sake, Riesling, or beer. That's the best thing with sushi. But yeah, red wine, you can really, really go wrong. I'm sorry to say. I'm really sorry to say that to you. It's funny. It's funny.
I was just kidding. I would never do that. He wouldn't even go to a sushi restaurant with red wine to leave. Right?
I keep my mouth shut when I see at my local place. I see it all the time, mouth shut. But you're here. I'm gonna let you in. I let you.
Places you go, I want to make sure I don't go to there.
Oh my goodness! Wow, you guys! I can't even offer you another pour. That is gone. But
Oh, can I just,
yes, please.
you mentioned, one of my tips.
Yes.
You mentioned all these, countries,
Yes.
$15 to $25, but you didn't mention South Africa. So cabs are, again, tariffs, shipping, whatever, do they fall into that price too?
South Africa, you can find good things for 15 and 25. The 15 to 25, excuse me. The reason I don't mention them is because they don't get a lot of shelf space, especially in Pennsylvania. So it's much easier to find a better selection of Spain, Australia, or South American wines. It's getting better, but they're still working on their export and really getting the market share that they deserve. Now,
Jersey or Delaware?
yeah. So the good news is that of everybody who has ever gone to South Africa for a wine tourism trip, they come back and say it's the best place you can go for wine, hands down. So put it on your bucket list when all things normalize and equal out. Go bring baggies and just bring back your own inventory and you'll be fine. But I'm so glad you enjoyed this. Yes.
Like, first of all, I want bottles of this, like a lot. But if and I'm not being a wise guy, if I can actually,
Yes.
okay.
You can, yeah.
My question is, clearly, this is like liquid gold to me. This is good.
Yeah.
And I want more. But my question is, can you recommend, I don't like sweet wines, but I am going to try what you said, the dry Riesling. I do want to try that.
Yeah.
Can you recommend a good one for that? And then if I were for sushi or fish, what's a good dry or not sweet white? Can you recommend? And then this is like...
Yeah. So a couple people have mentioned the Finger Lakes. So let me just tell you, I mentioned Ravine is one of my very favorite places. Red Tail Ridge is another place that is fantastic. There is also, let's see, Herman J. Weimer.
These are all whites?
Yes, Herman J. Weimer is a fantastic, absolutely gorgeous producer, German-style wines. So those are some great ones for the Finger Lakes. And then if you're looking for a dry white wine that is not Riesling, Albarino, as I mentioned, Albarino is fantastic. You can also look for, I'll write it down.
Thank you. Oh, big.
Albarino. Also, Chablis. Chablis is the French Chardonnay, and it's typically lighter and unoaked and perfectly dry. So those are some good options. Yes.
So let's say your favorite is Cabernet, that's all you drink. What would you recommend to diversify yourself?
Yes,
Like,
I understand. So that's a good question. Let me think. So the one that I often say is Carmenere, which is from Chile. But there's also Malbec in France. Now, not Argentina, but France. French Malbec is phenomenal. And here's the deal. Merlot can be just as fantastic as Cabernet. I know it's hard to believe, but in France, in Bordeaux, there are always blends of Cab and Merlot. So we have this idea that Merlot is bad. That's absolutely not true. You can get it from places like Bordeaux and even South Africa where it's absolutely gorgeous.
So do you recommend blends? Because I do drink.
Absolutely. I recommend blends, single, they're just different. There's not one that's better than the other. They're just different. Yeah. Yes.
You made a comment in Flake 3 about not going backwards to the Chianti. I was wondering if that was kind of a pattern to follow when serving different wines with food.
Yes. Yes. Here's a quick tip when you're doing a progression for a dinner. Start light and end full, right? So start with your lighter alcohol wines. So, 12, 13%, and then make your way up to 15, 16. And then if you were going to go back, definitely get a new glass or rinse. But yeah, that's how you want to basically course out your wine.
It's about the body, not like acidity or capacity.
It's a mix, but that's for a hard and fast rule. That's the easiest way to do it right. Yeah. Okay, guys, so tomorrow night, back here, same time? Are we going to do this again? I mean, this was a blast. I don't want this to end. I'm not ready. We have more wine here, okay? So you are welcome to come up and have more. No, you can't have any more of this. I gave you almost every last drop, but help yourself. If you would like to go back to the white wines, I'm happy to just give your glass a rinse and you can go in. But otherwise, you have been a joy. This is such a thrill to have people here looking at you without masks, and it's wonderful. And I really, truly hope you all come back and just Alana.
This was great.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks, guys. So sweet. Thank you. That's lovely. All right, I am going to put these wines up.